My book, The Spirit of Work, Timeless Wisdom, Current Realities, is now published. By interweaving science, business, and sacred texts from the world's great spiritual traditions, The Spirit of Work offers a high-level but approachable way to view and structure work from individual, community, and institutional perspectives. As part of the book's reach and outreach, I will be adding some solo podcasts and interviews with authors who write to build healthy workplaces, to give you a taste of how the book's concepts can enhance your workplace experience. To get to the Spirit of Work links and purchase from online stores directly, click on the online store of your choice from my website, which is shiftworkplace.com/the Spirit of Work. Make sure you put hyphens in between the words the Spirit of Work to ensure the correct URL comes up. So that's shiftworkplace.com/the Spirit of Work with hyphens. And that's how you'll get to your goal. Looking forward to your feedback. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. I am really interested to present to you Sam Chang, who is the founder of VTMEMBER, a virtual assistant company that he scaled from 0 to 65K in monthly recurring revenue in 6 months, no less. He is a serial entrepreneur who started his journey as a door-to-door meat salesman in college and has helped build one of the largest door-to-door sales teams here in Canada from 25 to 250 people. Sam is an introvert, believe it or not, who discovered sales as his superpower. And he's also a multi-instrument player. He specializes in guitar, but plays many other instruments and sings, and has a black belt in Taekwondo. So I am really excited to speak with Sam today, and welcome to the podcast, Sam.
Thank you for having me, Marie. I'm super excited.
Great. Please tell the audience a little bit about who you are, a bit about your background.
Sure. Let's start with my childhood. I was born in Taiwan and came to Canada when I was 2 years old. And when I came to Canada, obviously my parents were immigrants, and so they only taught me Mandarin. And so I didn't have a whole lot of friends growing up because I couldn't really communicate with them. So growing up, I was actually very introverted. And I remember eating lunch at home because I was afraid nobody would want to sit with me. And, I was just very introverted. And I remember when I entered college, that was when I found my very first door-to-door sales job. And I was a meat salesman. And I was selling beef, chicken, pork door-to-door. And it was freezer packages. There was $3,000 to $5,000 worth of meats in one go. And I remember on my 4th day on the job, that day changed my life. And the reason why is because that day I made almost $2,000 in cash doing door-to-door sales. I remember going home with that $2,000 and that was more money than I had in my bank account at the time. And I remember sitting there on a Monday morning in business class and I was like, why am I here? I'm like, I thought the whole reason why I'm here is to learn a trade skill so I can trade that skill for more money. But here I am. And, if I worked for the next 60 days nonstop and did what I did on the weekend, selling meat, I could have made more money than the prof. So it didn't really make sense to me. So anyway, so long story short, I dropped out of school when I was 19. I flew across the country to Vancouver and I started a door-to-door sales company selling for one of the largest telecom companies over here in Canada. And at the time when I joined the company, there's 25 people and we scaled that to 250 people. And, I played a huge role in training, development, recruitment. And after that was when I kind of started my entrepreneurial journey after I learned all the skills in the corporate world. And I tried multiple different businesses, which failed, and finally landed upon this business that we're doing right now, VTMEMBER. And VTMEMBER, just in short, what we do is we source, we hire, we train, and then we also manage a virtual workforce for North American companies, but we do it for less than half the cost of a North American employee. So we do everything from data entry, cold calling, appointment setting, graphic design, video editing, web development, anything virtual you can think of, we do, except we do for $8 an hour. And the way that we do it that's a little bit different is that when you hire a team from us, you not only get the actual employee, but you also get a project manager and you get a local North American agent to support you on the campaign to make sure that it's successful. As opposed to, you going online on a Upwork or a Fiverr to find, a contractor, you get an entire team with us for $8 an hour.
That's a great business model. I'll ask you more about that in a bit.
Sure.
But I want to go back to your childhood and your adolescence. So a time, some incident that happened from your childhood and maybe from your adolescence or both that really stand out that you think contributed to who you are today. Something that was, marked you.
Mm-hmm. I think overall, I want to start with parenting. I believe I was perfectly parented. And I think that could be a good book name one day. But I truly, genuinely believe, the role that your parents play in your life plays a huge role, right? And growing up, I think my parents were protective, but at the same time, they let me select the things that I like to do and they let me try things and they didn't hold me back. And I think overall, and I will talk about a moment in time, but just as a blanket statement, I think that overall, I'm actually really grateful that my parents, they weren't, uber wealthy, because that puts a drive in me. If I don't, quote unquote, make it, right? My parents will not be able to retire on time. And that for me is like a huge driver for everything that I do, my family. I would say that's kind of like a blanket statement. And then if I was to talk about like a moment in time, so a moment in time was actually before I did my meat sales job. I was a call center, outbound B2B agent selling American Express credit cards. Okay. And I was like, a couple years before door-to-door sales. I remember when I was doing over the phone, I was doing cold calling. So I was doing 200 to 300 cold calls a day, selling credit cards. When I first started that job, because I was an introvert, I was the bottom of the food chain. Like I made no money. I was on the verge of getting fired. And I remember watching the movie Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if you've seen the movie, Marie, but the movie Wolf of Wall Street, there was a scene in the movie and it was Jordan on the phone and he was doing a cold call, but he just sounded like butter, right? And he was like, hi, hey, this is Jordan calling from blah, 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 blah. I remember taking every single word from that scene and copying that down on a sheet of paper, like literally line paper when we used to have line paper in school, right? I take that to work. And I remember the previous month, I sold 2 cars the whole month. I basically rewrote the movie script to the American Express script. I took that script to work the next day. And the next day, I sold 2 cards. That was a game-changing moment for me because that moment basically reinforced my belief that sales and communication and anything that you really want to get better at can be learned. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm ever going to become an NBA basketball player because I'm not 6'6", 230 pounds, right? But does that mean I can go from a level 5 basketball player to a level 8? Yeah. Will I ever be a level 10? Will I ever be a Kobe Bryant or a Michael Jordan? No, but I can improve. And I think going from like a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, that was like a huge turning point for me.
That's a great story because first off, it showed that you recognized when people just watch movies, it doesn't occur to them that they could use something from the movie for their lives. But you watched it and you went, this is a really good sales technique here. I'm going to copy that down. There's being aware of it. And then once you're aware of it, it's also using it and then testing it and seeing how you can apply it to the new situation of being an American Express card salesperson. And then perfecting it to right away, you started to see the results. So then you go, okay, I'm on the right track. So it also shows the willingness to test, right? I think it's a great story. Can you go back even further when you were a lot younger? I mean, you talked a little bit about being an introvert in school, and is anything there or within your family that stands out for you that you think was foundational or formational?
Mm-hmm. I have a couple of memories bubbling up in my frontal lobe right now of instances where I was bullied. But ultimately, what it boils down to is that I was shunned. And I think a lot of being bullied has to do with my drive, because there are moments that I can recall where I was not even just not included in the group. I wasn't even a thought. They didn't even know who I was, and the teacher knows me, but like nobody else really like knows that I really exist. And I think like inside growing up, I always had this desire to kind of be at the center of attention. I think growing up when I was at home, not preschool, but like pre going to school, my parents had a nickname for me. It was chatterbox. In Mandarin, it's called gua gua. I was definitely not a chatterbox when I went to school, but pre going to school, I was a chatterbox. Now that memory is kind of like fuzzy for me. I don't really remember it, but I remember when I was going to school, like, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, I was just like the kid always standing on the outside of the circle trying to get in, but nobody would really know that I'm even trying to get in. And I just felt like, I was insignificant, right? And I think a lot of that plays into the drive that I have right now, because I think, Tony Robbins talks about there's 6 human needs: there's certainty, variety, love and connection, significance, growth, and contribution, right? And I think out of the 6, significance rings really loud for me.
Yeah, because every human being needs to feel acknowledged. And when you're a child and you feel shunned or you feel invisible, it's very damaging to your sense of self. But you were able to turn that into a strength because, in fact, you turned it into a superpower, because when you went into your meat sales job, you realized that you could influence a situation, and the situation didn't have to just influence you. You could influence the situation yourself. And positively, really well. You could strategize it so that the situation had really great outcomes. Maybe you wouldn't have developed that skill if you wouldn't have had the experience in childhood of being on the outside and you had to observe people.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for sharing those with me. I really identify. I was in 10 different schools when I was growing up. So it was one shunning experience after another and one bullying experience after another. So I know what that feels like to be invisible and how important it is for kids to feel like they matter and for them to be drawn into a group that anyone in the circle has the responsibility to draw others in that aren't there. And it's something that people who have always been confident about being included doesn't occur to them because they didn't have to go through that experience.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a driver, though. I think that if you look at the greatest achievers in the world, I think if you really dig into their childhood, there's some form of insecurities there that drives them.
Yeah, hardship develops character or it destroys you. So you choose. You chose for it to develop.
That's right. So I see a pattern there.
Me too. So from the groups that you were born into, I mean, you're born into a Taiwanese family and you spoke Mandarin, and that must have influenced you. There may have been other groups that you were born into too that have influenced you. So what were those groups contribute to your sense of culture and self?
So let's talk about family first, and I want to talk about church for a moment. So my dad was in Taiwanese military. And so he treated my brother and I like we were soldiers, essentially, growing up. So I remember growing up, there was one time where my dad told me to take a saw to go outside. We had a cherry tree in the backyard to saw off the branch that he was going to spank me with. And he told me he was going to spank me with that branch until it broke.
Oh, man.
It was like, and I went outside and I sawed off a branch and he came back in. He was like, it's too small. Go back and get it. Another one.
Oh, no.
I remember just growing up, there's like so many scenarios like that. And it was just like from moments where I would like rebel or whatever. And my dad just always kept me in check. And that contributed to the side of me, which is like highly disciplined. Like I am probably one of the most disciplined people that you will meet, when it comes to
because of fear of punishment.
Right. Because in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, my dad's going to come and spank me again. No, like it forms a habit, right? Like growing up, if you didn't have a choice and you just had to do it, right? Like over time, you become just, it becomes second nature. It's just like, okay, well, somebody says jump, you say how high kind of thing. And that worked for me and it also worked against me as well. As you know, I worked in a corporate environment. Like I worked for a company called Leadcore, which is a multi-billion-dollar construction company, highly corporate. I had a boss, my boss had a boss, my boss had a boss. And so, there's a whole pyramid kind of set up there. And so for me, I was very compliant and it stifled my creativity. But anyways, going back to my family, that played a huge role. Now, the environment that my mother created for me is an environment where it totally counterbalanced that. My mother was the most loving mother. She is so sweet. She's so loving. She is everything a person would want in a mom. And that perfectly balanced my dad because my dad would, spank me and I'd go back to my room and I'd be like bawling my eyes out, being like, I'm running away. Like, this is it. This is the last straw. And my mom would, come into the room and calm me down and say, hey, dad's doing this because he loves you. Dad's doing this because he cares about you. He wants you to be successful in the future, et cetera, et cetera. And so my mom would perfectly counterbalance that, which is the reason why I say I was perfectly parented, right? Because having just my dad or having just my mom is more care without candor and my dad is candor without care. Not to say that my dad was, had no care, but when I was young, and my dad was, still young and learning how to be a dad, it was definitely candor without care. And for the listeners who, don't really know the difference, care without candor is caring about the person's emotions, and candor without care is caring too much about the person's potential, but not how they feel.
Well, candor is honesty. So you're talking about taking honesty and kindness and putting them together so that there's a balance.
Correct. And that's what my parents provided for me. Now, in terms of leadership, I think For me, church played a huge role growing up. And church, when we observe people in the Bible, I think leadership as it's displayed in the Bible, a lot has to do with sacrifice. A lot has to do with showing leadership through love, right? Leadership through compassion. So church played a huge role in that group that I belong to, going to church every single week, going to, joining community groups and joining youth groups. That instilled that part in me. And throughout my life, it's been a huge part of my life. And so, so I think that really plays a huge role in terms of my leadership style, because leadership, it's a tricky thing, right? But you do have to model in the beginning, because leadership, it is something that's passed down throughout the generations. And when you're modeling, you have to make sure that you're modeling a leader that you want to exemplify.
Yeah, it's typical of a lot of Asian families to have that sort of combination of very high expectations with severe outcomes if you don't meet them, together with real deep love and care. And that mixture together, I think, is what you're talking about. And then to have that in the context of the church that you went to, it provided a faith perspective and other examples that pointed you towards altruism, not just doing things for yourself or to reach certain goals personally, but to do things in a way that would be sacrificial, I think is what you mentioned. Is that correct?
Yeah, spot
on. So what about groups that you joined as you got older? I mean, you became part of different sales teams. That would have also influenced your sense of culture and leadership as well. But there would have been other groups. Taekwondo must have had a role to play. What are some of the other groups that you joined as you went through life that have influenced you?
So, I mean, I can talk about groups, and I can also talk about hobbies or like practices that I did. So piano was a huge part of my life. I started playing piano when I was 5, and I played all the way till I was 18. So the discipline of day in, day out, an hour and a half every single day of practicing, like that has been wired like into me. And so again, going back to the discipline part, discipline has never been an area of my life where I'm lagging in, because it was basically beaten into me growing up, right? Now, if I can talk a little bit about the groups I chose to belong to when I was a little bit older, I think when I dropped out of school and I joined the sales team at Ledcor, that I would say is a huge turning point in my life, because I dropped out of school, right? And I am Asian.
I was going to ask you how you negotiated that.
Being an Asian in an Asian household, where going to college, getting a good job,
and increasing the status of the family through your accomplishments.
Exactly, right? Like making your family proud, like everybody's watching Mulan from Disney, like respect and, the whole thing, right? And dropping out of school, it was tough. Like, I think like it was a tough decision on my part, but it was also tough for my family to swallow. The only reason why my parents were okay with it was because when I was in school selling meat for 3 days a week, I was making more than my dad doing that part-time already. So they were like, maybe Sam has something figured out. So I think that was the only reason why my parents were like relatively okay. But still to this day, my parents would say, hey, when are you going to go back to school?
Yeah. What's your fallback plan, right?
Yeah. What's your fallback plan if your business doesn't work out or whatever? I'm like, there is no way. And if you've ever experienced entrepreneurship, like there is no way I am going to ever go back to working for someone ever again.
Well, I'm an entrepreneur, so you're preaching to the choir here.
Right. Exactly. Like I would rather be free and broke than be a slave to someone else and have the golden handcuffs, right? So anyway, so I think the team though at Ledcor, when I first joined, there were a couple of individuals there that played a huge role in my life when it came to personal development. Before Ledcor, I didn't even know what personal development was. I didn't even know there were books that you can read on improving your sales skills or improving your leadership skills or improving your communication skills or like improving yourself, period. Like in terms of your mindset. I didn't even know that books like that existed. And the way I became a leader, yes, it was baptism by fire. Yes, they took me, threw me in the water and, told me to swim. And I definitely drowned a couple of times. But I think the environment at Ledcor when I first joined, what was really special was that I was surrounded by other people that were reading every single day, right? We were door-to-door sales guys. They were reading every single day. They were listening to modules. They were watching videos. They were, all kinds of stuff. Like we hired Grant Cardone at one point. Like there were all kinds of stuff like when we first joined. And I think that environment, the whole saying, surround yourself with the 5 people, blah, blah, blah. Like you're the
average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Yeah.
That's true. It is absolutely 100% without a doubt true. Like true. It is 100% true. And the 5 people around me, my team, we all read every single day. And, I just had this mentality that if I dropped out of school and I wasn't in school, well, I have to be growing. I have to be learning, because if I'm not, I'm going to fall behind. And then what I realized was that it's crazy. Like, people who go to school after their 4th year university, they don't learn anymore. Like, they literally, like, their learning stops there and they just consume crap on the internet all day long.
So you went into a culture of learning, and that nurtured you and nurtured them and created bonds and also new ideas for you to create with, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that would definitely have had a strong influence. You were already oriented towards learning, but this just sort of solidified it in the personal development and interpersonal skills area, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are there other groups that you feel influenced you that you chose? You mentioned hobbies. I mean, piano was the discipline. And what about Taekwondo? Was that more discipline?
Taekwondo is all about discipline too. Like, it's about discipline and respect, right? You learn all of these skills and, you can use them in a fight, but it's all about how do you communicate and how do you exercise self-control? Like, all of these things, it's like built into me, like nurtured into me, like growing up. But in terms of groups, I would say, like, honestly, there wasn't a whole lot of groups that I joined because we were really moving around so much. So the groups never really solidified. I think it was really when I left school, I think that was like the biggest turning point for me. And then growing up, it was just what I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. So you have mega discipline in your life from your family and all of the things that you undertook.
Yeah.
But you don't seem like a harsh person. You don't seem like you're over the top power over other people. You seem more like a great conversationalist and a person who is a good listener. Was that conversation and listening, was that coming from you as an introvert that you just brought with you, you think, that counterbalanced all of this?
Well, no, actually, what's interesting is, growing up, I always thought, leadership is about sacrifice. Leadership is all about having compassion, similar to what Jesus did in the Bible. And growing up, I thought that. When I was thrown into the corporate environment, it was like
the opposite.
It was like I was a freshwater fish thrown to salt water. You either die or you adapt. And it was very cutthroat. It was dog eat dog. And I'll be very honest, like, my ego got the best of me. And, when you have an environment where there's 250 people all looking up to you and saying you're awesome, the company TELUS, right? So I was the fastest person within TELUS to 1,000 sales. And TELUS, they were very happy with me. Our superiors were very happy with me. And so my ego got the best of me. Everything changed in 2017, because in 2017, I actually had a cancer scare. So I had this lump like in the back of my throat, and I went in to the doctor, and basically they were like, yeah, we got to do a surgery to cut out your tonsils because we have to run a biopsy on it to see whether or not it's malignant, blah, blah, blah. But they were like basically saying there's a good chance that this may be cancer. So I went in, did the surgery, came out. Obviously, I'm here today, so I'm not dying. I didn't have cancer. It was just like
you could be a ghost, but I'm suspecting no.
Yeah. So it was a scary moment for me. But when I discovered that I didn't have cancer and I felt like I had my life back, it was like a turning point for me, because I evaluated my life and, imagine like a boat, like the wake that I left. And I was looking at the people that I made an impact on. And like what I really evaluated was my intention, in 2017. And my intention, it wasn't really about the people that I was serving. The intention was really about me. And because it was about me, it made me really go deep and reflect on the reason why I was doing everything that I was doing.
To have some status.
That's right. I was driving the nice car. I had the nice apartment. I had the girlfriend, I had all the things that like
you prove your worth from other people validating you.
That's right. Because of my childhood, because I was bullied, because et cetera, et cetera. And so that moment changed me, because everything that I did after that became about other people, right? It became about, how do I serve other people? Now, maybe I can only serve you by buying you a cup of coffee. Maybe I can serve you by opening a door, but maybe I can serve you a little bit more. Maybe I can offer some advice as a stranger, walking down English Bay and sitting on a bench, and, you might be having a tough day, and I give you some advice that changes your life. I don't know. Maybe I can serve you in a deeper way where, I can coach you. Whatever it is, after that, it really changed me. So to answer your question, I wasn't always like this. And people go through their development kind of arcs, right? But I definitely wasn't always like this.
You're definitely self-reflective, though. It's also really honest of you to say that your ego got the best of you and that you felt that that was not good and that it required a scare to get yourself back in balance again. Because people don't realize that there's strength in saying this is a difficulty that I had to struggle with and to overcome and that I may still struggle with. And that increases the respect of the listener to know that you're not just making up a story about how great you are. It's about being human and then finding what's your purpose. And that's probably what led you eventually to doing the VT member with the virtual assistant company, because that's all about service, really.
That's right. We're literally a service-based company. We help entrepreneurs. Our target market really are young entrepreneurs that, especially in this shrinking labor market, especially in this crushing economic landscape, to be able to scale without having a whole lot of capital. That's literally the market that we service, like solopreneurs who want to scale and they don't want to spend too much money. We also work with large corporations that want to scale as well, who just want to save money. But a lot of our client base right now are, solopreneurs where they want to scale, but they just don't have a whole lot of cash.
But how do you stop the people providing the services from being exploited in that process?
You're talking about our team members. How do we create an environment where they're not exploited?
To offer it for $8 an hour, that's pretty low.
Yeah. So all of our team members are across India, South Africa, and Philippines. So they're not local. Obviously, $8 an hour local would be illegal, right? Because minimum wage in Vancouver is like 15 an hour, right? So all of our team members are offshore, and we pay them, 3 to 4 times what the minimum wage is there to start with. And then we build a career progression plan for every single team member that joins our team. For example, one of our team members, Hannah, has tripled her pay since she started with us in July last year.
Good business model and oriented towards people's growth, depending on their desire to move within the organization. So that's great. And also they feel like they belong, because lots of virtual assistant companies they're just looking for people to plug in to some bunch of gigs, but then you're building a whole sense of culture with this.
That's right. And so we actually built an online university as well. It teaches leadership, teaches negotiation, sales, everything I learned in the last, however many years I was in sales and leadership. I basically virtualized myself in an interactive training platform that we provide all of our internal team members with. And then we also sell that as well as a separate revenue generator.
This is great. Each thing you say makes me think of something else, but we talked a little bit about your temperament, what you were born with. Maybe you started as a chatterbox, became an introvert, and then came back into finding your voice in a different way. And you've talked a lot about progression and development, but what would you say you were born with, and what personality aspects have you added on?
I think I was born extroverted, and then I became an introvert because of certain insecurities and certain events. And because my interpretation of those events, I reacted in a certain way. And then I think my extroverted self came back out through acting.
I didn't know you were acting as well.
Yeah. I know. I don't think I'm acting now. I think it's when I first got into sales, I think I did it through acting because, if you really think about it, like I told you the story with American Express and Wolf of Wall Street, I saw Leonardo DiCaprio on screen and I was like, I'm like, Leonardo DiCaprio can play any role. He can pretend to be confident and an amazing salesperson. Why can't I? And so I think the whole fake it till you make it worked for me, but I think I like to say faith it till you believe it.
Yeah, really. That's a lovely way of saying it, because that's exactly what it is. You just trust that it's going to work until it becomes who you are and how you do things.
Totally. And I think Tony Robbins talks about that too, because he says that in his Netflix documentary, I'm Not Your Guru. He says this whole Tony Robbins character was created. I crafted him. And that really resonated with me as I was thinking about my story in my life, because I'm like, yeah, I felt like who I am today. I felt like I created him basically over time. And so I think when you say my temperament and my personality and how I affected the world, I think growing up, it's events that affect you and who you become, but it's also your interpretation of those events. And I think how you manage those interpretations, it's through who you listen to. Bottom line, at the end of the day, if I had a mentor there at every moment in my life where things fell off the rails, or, when I go through failures, if I had somebody there to normalize my failure instead of ostracize my hardships, then maybe I'd be better off. But again, everything happens for a reason. I think I'm very grateful for, the events that happened in my life for me to become who I am today.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've had quite a few, but can you recall a time when you became aware that the way you understood the world was specific to you and your culture, and that other people might do things differently? And did you have a cultural awareness or cultural dissonance moment that you can recall?
Yeah. When I quit Leadcore, I remember the moment that I decided I quit. And that moment was when I was sitting in a boardroom and the general manager at the time, by the way, in the boardroom, there were directors, there were senior managers, senior regional managers, location managers, and there's like at least like 25, 30 people in the room in a boardroom downtown Vancouver, just so we can have the visual. And I remember the general manager put up a slide on screen and all it said was, how do we make our business better? And I remember people started to, put up their hands and talking over each other, which is, what we always do in these meetings. I mean, we have these quarterly business reviews every single quarter, right? So the regular kind of shenanigans ensue. And I remember putting up my hand and waiting for 15 minutes because I was like, no one
was respecting the norm.
Nobody was respecting
there was no set expectation for the norm to be there.
And mind you, I was one of the seniors as well. Like I was a senior regional manager. So I reported directly to the general manager. So everybody was just talking to each other because, everybody wanted to look bigger than they actually were. And when they finally got to me, I asked him, let's call him John for a moment. One question I said, hey, John, do you care about, and then let's just say his right-hand man, let's just call him George for a moment. I was like, John, do you care about George enough, care about his future enough? And do you love him to the point where if he had another opportunity outside of our company and you knew it was better for him and you knew he would make more money, you knew he'd make more development, do you care enough about him to convince him to leave?
What did he say?
He said, do you want me to answer that right now? And in my mind, I'm like,
because he couldn't answer it. That's why.
Right. And in my mind, I'm like,
because he didn't care. That's a definite no, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. and out loud, I said, because the answer to that question is going to determine whether our business gets better or not.
Good for you.
And that moment was like the dissonance that you were mentioning. That moment was like when I was
you know what? I am not a good fit here and they're not a good fit for me.
That's right. And I started planning my exit.
Good for you. Yeah. I think most of us have those defining moments when we decide this is it, time to go. This is too much of a clash with my values.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's great. You are a very good storyteller. I'm appreciating it so much. So we're getting to the end of the interview and you're going to be telling me a little bit more about what brings out the best in you when you're working with other people. That's what I'm really interested in knowing.
I think the world has no shortage of talented people.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Like over the years, I did door-to-door sales. Do you know how many talented people came through the door, figured it wasn't for them and they left? I have list upon list of thousands and thousands of people that I met, trained, had conversations with, deep conversations with, coached. And I think for me, what pulls out the best in me is when I see someone who has the willingness, somebody who really wants it. And I think a part of it is nurture, a part of it is nature. But when I see someone like that,
they want to grow, they want to learn, and it matters to them. You feel that.
It's not something that you can describe using words, but you feel it. That brings out the best because now I'm rooting for you, right? So I would say that would be my answer.
That's great. So here's your soapbox moment so you can promote anything you want to promote. Go right ahead and do that. I'm all ears.
Oh, great. So this is my shameless promotional moment. Okay.
Totally.
Okay, great. So for the people who are listening, obviously we have a business that we do everything from data entry, cold calling, appointment setting, graphic design, video editing, web development, all the skills that I've learned throughout the years when it comes to cold calling, that I've virtualized myself in a university format to train all of our cold callers and appointment setters on that. So essentially every experience that I've ever had, it's all in there from 8 different tonalities, psychologically backed, that creates an emotion in the client. There is all the objection handles, everything in there. And so if you want access to that university in the future, we're going to charge a monthly subscription because we're constantly adding new content in there. But right now it's $349 US one time, and you get access to it for life because we're essentially launching it. And the first initial, people who hop on, that becomes our initial capital for ad spend, marketing, that kind of thing. So that's the reason why we're doing that right now. But yeah, so it's $350. So anyway, that's it. I don't really have a whole lot of things to promote because our business is scaling a lot and I'm already kind of out of breath. And we have a wait list for people who want to work with us. So, but right now the university piece is forefront, center of mind right now. So
that's great. So the people can get that by going to what website?
VTMember.ca/university.
University, right. And then they can become an early adopter and get the lifetime membership, which is always the better deal. Right. But before you move it to a subscription model. So that's great. Anything else you'd like to say?
Nothing. I really, really enjoyed this. I mean, I felt like this was almost therapeutic for me because I was pulling things up from my past. And I think these are great questions. And what you have going on, Marie, is fantastic. So yeah, and it makes me want to start my own podcast too, because, I think this is fantastic. I really, really enjoyed this conversation with you today. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you, Sam. I really enjoyed the conversation too. I think that's the key to a good podcast is when you're interviewing and you both really enjoy that conversation. It's golden.
Hmm.
So yeah, thank you so much for being such an articulate and interesting guest. And I wish you all the best with everything that you do. And I'm very excited to dig into your website and find out more.
Thank you, Marie.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Sam Chang has a fascinating story of learning to be the best at everything he did or face the wrath of his military father. From a childhood of being bullied at school to finding his superpower selling meat door to door, Sam honed his ability to observe people's psychological state to the point where he could read their drivers and respond instantly to what they deeply wanted. This turned into a very profitable business, training salespeople and building a virtual internationally skilled team to serve entrepreneurs at affordable fees. Most interestingly, his business model not only serves the person purchasing the VA services, but develops the VA within the company for higher earning, learning opportunities, and growth within the organization. By building a culture of belonging and excellence, Sam has created the world he would have dearly loved to inhabit as a timid youngster, where everyone is seen not only for who they are now, but for their potential for growth. I hope you enjoyed this insightful conversation with Sam Chang as much as I did, and that you will share it with someone who you think could benefit from it. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to fill your day with joy. Hey, podcast listeners, help us reach our goal of 1,000 downloads per episode by going to followthepodcast.com/culture and leadership. That's followthepodcast.com/culture and leadership. If you type that into your browser and you use the and sign, not the word and, culture and leadership, it will automatically adjust to your phone. And then you can follow and rate. So followthepodcast.com/culture and leadership. Thanks in advance for following and for reviewing.